First of all, I want to thank Sinn Féin, congratulate them. It's a very good motion, and it's good to hear the government will not be objecting to it or opposing it like they normally do just for the sake of it. And so I hope it does make a difference. There's one thing I want to mention. You weren't in the chamber this morning, Minister, when I mentioned it. On top of all of the details about the crisis in our service and how that could be improved by having a more efficient flow through to beds and ambulance service, etc. And that's the question of home care packages, because there are so many beds that could be freed up from our hospital service that you wouldn't have ambulances waiting outside the door had these beds been freed up. But there is a total chaos in provision of home care packages. And I understand from talking to the local health teams in Ballyfermot and beyond that many of the workers are leaving the companies that provide these packages because their pay and conditions are so poor, and they don't get paid travel time and they don't get paid expenses for using their own car, or if they have to take taxis and buses, and they're constantly under pressure by the companies that employ them. Now, a lot of these things, inefficiencies, etc., can come down to workers' rights and how they're treated, particularly if we can't recruit them and retain them. And this could be also true. This could be also helped by dealing with this group of workers in the home care industry in a proper and decent way. And that brings me directly to what I want to say about our amendment. I want to move the amendment from Solidarity, or People for Profit Solidarity. And we want to add in to direct the HSE to recognise the National Ambulance Service Representative Association, known as NASRA, affiliated to the Psychiatric Nurses Association, as a trade union with full collective bargaining rights for its members employed in the National Ambulance Service. Now, you may recall when you were in opposition, there were at least 7 days that this group of workers, there's over 500 of them, organised and systematically organised in the National Ambulance Services Association, and they were often outside the gates of the Dáil, sometimes hundreds of them, really banging on our doors to ask you as Minister and previous ministers to tell the HSE to recognise this group of workers, with nearly half of the staff inside the National Ambulance Service in their membership. And the previous ministers refused to do it. Now I'm appealing to you to do likewise, and we want to move that amendment to be taken with the rest of the Sinn Féin motion. Why? Because for very many years, and I know this from personal experience, my brother was an ambulance driver, he's gone now, but for very many years workers in the ambulance service were extremely frustrated at the low levels of representation and services that they got from their existing unions, and they have a right to move on and establish themselves in other unions. And the union that they are connected with, the Psychiatric Nurses Association, has 50 years' experience of organising within the health service, so that is really important. And when it comes to trying to advance legislation in relation to how you would bring on community paramedicine and chronic disease management to provide alternatives, you're going to have to talk to workers. You can't leave them out of the loop. I understand there are trials in place, but there is a cohort of those workers whom nobody is talking to, and that's why this matters in a very concrete way. It matters to fulfil the objective of having a workforce that buys into, that agrees with, that is, enthusiastic about major changes to be made in their lives, and that's why this amendment to the Sinn Féin motion is so important. The other thing I'd just like to address quickly, I mentioned my brother worked in the service. One of the first things he had to do when he was called out, and he was very junior and the training was not nearly as good back in the day, was to a car crash where a man had been decapitated. And he suffered very, very badly psychologically for a long, long time with the memory of that, and got no counselling, no supports, no backup. In fact, I don't think he even got sick leave at the time. So the section of this that says expand mental health supports for the workforce, including access to counselling and psychiatric services where they are appropriate, is an absolute essential, because after all, these workers are on a daily basis dealing with complex cases, dealing with life and death, and without them we would all suffer greatly. And because they're suffering, the service is suffering, and there's like a domino effect. from the time the ambulance tries to get to you, to when it gets to the hospital, to when it meets the trolley crisis, to when the bed blocking happens. I hate the term, but that explains it best, to not having the home care services. So there's a whole load of complex problems here, but you must talk to workers, and here is a crucial cohort of workers that have to be recognised.
Captain McBarry.